she won't even know what hit her. That's what stopped me. Not the creak of the garage door. Not the October air rushing in around my ankles. Just those 6 words, low and certain, coming from the side yard where I knew my son-in-law had gone to take a quick call. I stood very still with the rosemary clippers in my hand. I told you. His voice was warm the way it got when he was pleased with himself. Once she signs the deed over on Saturday, everything changes. The business, the building, all of it transfers. After that, she's got nothing in writing. 6 weeks, maybe 8. Then I file a pause, a soft laugh. Yeah, I know. I can't wait either. I didn't move for a full 10 seconds, long enough to hear him say one more thing. She trusts me completely, always has. I set the clippers down on the workbench very carefully. Then I walked back inside through the kitchen door, past the pot of soup I had been stirring, past the framed photo of my late husband standing outside the shop the day we opened it. 1987, his hair still dark, both of us grinning like we'd just been handed the whole world. And I sat down at the table. My hands were perfectly still. That surprised me, actually. I had expected to shake. I should back up, because none of this will make sense without context. My husband and I opened Hartwell's Flower Market 36 years ago in a narrow brick building on Millbrook Avenue, in a part of Clover Falls, Tennessee, that nobody much cared about at the time. We did care about it. We painted the window trim ourselves. We sourced from local growers when we could afford to. We figured out holidays, funerals, proms, and Valentine's days. We built something from scratch, and it was ours. When he died, a Tuesday in February 4 years ago now, a blood clot that gave us no warning, I kept the shop open. It was the only thing I knew to do. Some people say grief moves you forward. For me, it just moved me sideways. You're still standing in the same room. You just have fewer walls. My daughter had been working the shop since she was 16. She knows the suppliers, the seasonal rhythms, the names of the regulars who come in every Friday for the same small arrangement they take to whatever grave or windowsill or kitchen table has become their ritual. She belongs there in a way that not many people belong anywhere. So when she met her husband at a friend's birthday party 3 years ago and brought him home for the first time, I paid close attention. He was charming. That's the word I kept landing on. Not warm, charming. There's a difference, and I am 63 years old, and I have seen enough of both to know it. But my daughter lit up around him, and that counted for something. He asked good questions about the business. He had opinions about the delivery van that had been giving us trouble. He offered to help with the website. He married her 13 months later in a small ceremony at the community garden. I stood in the front row and watched her face and thought, she is happy. That is the thing. He started coming into the shop more after that. Helping, he said. He had a background in sales, he told me, and connections in commercial real estate, and he thought Hartwell's could expand if we were smarter about the way we held our assets. He said the word assets a lot. He also said legacy, which I noticed, and future-proofing, which I did not fully understand. 8 months ago, he sat across from me at this same kitchen table with a folder of documents and explained that if I transferred the building's deed and the business license into a shared LLC, all 3 of us, it would protect us from liability, reduce our tax exposure, and position the shop to grow into something my grandchildren might inherit someday. I had told him I'd think about it. He had smiled and said, "Of course, take all the time you need." That Saturday, the Saturday coming in 4 days, I was supposed to sign. I went to my desk that night after he left, after my daughter kissed my cheek and said she'd call in the morning. I sat under the lamp with a cup of tea I did not drink, and I thought about what I had heard. Once she signs the deed over, everything changes. I pulled out my phone and opened a message thread I hadn't used in 6 months. My old friend from my teaching years, Cecily Marsh, had retrained as a paralegal in her 50s and now worked at a property law office outside Nashville. We had never lost touch, not really, even when life made us quiet for long stretches at a time. I typed, "Need your eyes on something, not urgent tonight, but soon." Her reply came at 11:47 p. Already awake, send it. I scanned the LLC documents and sent them over. Then I added, "Can you look up what happens to a transferred commercial deed if the LLC partners separate?" specifically if one partner files for divorce from the owner's daughter. The three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, oh honey, give me until morning. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my husband's old roll-top desk with the lamp turned low and pulled out every document my son-in-law had ever handed me. The LLC paperwork, a letter from a commercial developer, Greenway Properties, LLC, based in Nashville, that had arrived 6 months ago addressed to the shop and that he had intercepted, explaining it was just a routine inquiry, nothing worth my time. I had believed him. I hadn't thrown the letter away, though. I'm a schoolteacher's daughter. We keep paper. I read it now. Greenway Properties had made an offer to purchase the Millbrook Avenue building for $1.4 million. They were planning a mixed-use development on that block. They wanted to break ground by spring. The letter was addressed to the property owner or authorized representative. He had been positioning himself to become the authorized representative. I set the letter face down on the desk and pressed my palm flat against it for a long moment. Outside the window, a car moved slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling. I watched the light pass. At 6:15 a.m., Cecily called. "If you sign those documents," she said, without preamble, "and the LLC is established, and then he files for divorce from your daughter, his attorney will argue for his percentage of all LLC assets. That includes the building. In Tennessee, if the deed is held by the LLC, it's considered a business asset, not an inheritance or personal property. He could force a sale to settle the split." I stared at the Greenway letter. "How long has this been set up?" she asked. "I don't know yet." "Don't sign anything, not until you know." "I know." A pause. "Do you want me to dig a little deeper? I still have a contact at the county recorder's office." "Yes," I said, "please." I thanked her and ended the call. Then I put the kettle on, because that is what you do when the ground has shifted under your feet and you need to remember what your hands are for. I want to explain something, because I have thought about it, and I understand why someone might ask, why didn't I just call my daughter that morning? Why didn't I show her the Greenway letter and play her the conversation I'd overheard and let her draw her own conclusions? I almost did. I picked up the phone twice. But I knew her. I raised her. I know the way she gets when she loves someone, that complete, unguarded way she has always given herself to things she cares about. The way she cried at a sad movie when she was 7 and couldn't explain why, just kept saying it was so beautiful, like beauty and sadness were the same thing to her. She loved her husband that way, completely. If I had called her that morning with nothing but my own overheard words and a developer's letter, she would have said there must be an explanation. She would have told him what I'd said. He would have adjusted, covered, charmed his way back into her certainty, and I would have lost the only advantage I had, that he did not know I knew. I needed her to see it herself in a way she couldn't unsee. Cecily called back Thursday afternoon. The Greenway representative has had 3 in-person meetings at the Millbrook building in the past 4 months. The sign-in log at the city planning office shows one of those meetings was attended by a third party, not your daughter, a man matching your son-in-law's description. I set down my coffee. "There's more," she said, and her voice had gone careful in the way that meant she was about to say something she didn't want to. "A lease agreement filed in Davidson County 3 months ago for an apartment in East Nashville. The leaseholder is listed as Bryn Carver. The co-signer is your son-in-law." I was quiet for long enough that Cecily said my name. "I'm here," I said. "I'm sorry." I heard myself say it, and I meant it. He's the one who should be sorry. The celebration lunch was my daughter's idea. She had planned it herself, a small gathering at the shop after closing on Saturday, before the attorney arrived to finalize the documents. Her closest friends, my sister, a few longtime customers. She'd strung lights along the front windows and ordered a cake from the bakery down the block. She wanted to mark the occasion. She said it felt like the next chapter. He had been delighted by the idea. I spent Friday quietly. I ran the shop. I watered the front cooler arrangements. I called my attorney, a woman named Ms. Voss, who has handled my affairs since my husband passed, and told her to hold the signing. Paperwork issue on my end, I said. She was professional about it. She moved the appointment without asking questions. Then I went to the back office and found my husband's old handheld tape recorder, the little one he'd used to leave me grocery lists when I was at the shop and he was home. I had kept it because I could not bring myself to erase his voice. I charged it overnight. Friday evening, I drove to Millbrook, let myself in with my keys, and set the recorder beneath the counter behind the front register, wedged between the spare ribbon rolls and the backup credit card machine, out of sight. The acoustics in there have always been good. Old brick walls, high-pressed tin ceilings, no carpeting to swallow sound. I drove home and made dinner and did not think too hard about Saturday. The lunch was lovely. I want to be honest about that. My daughter had made the room beautiful. The lights were warm. The flowers were from our own stock, fat white dahlias and trailing eucalyptus, and she had written a little speech on an index card that she read with her voice wavering and her chin held up and her eyes very bright. She thanked me for everything. She said the shop was her home. She said she could not imagine doing this without the two of us. He stood beside her with one hand on the small of her back. He smiled at all the right moments. When she finished, he kissed her temple and said she was the most remarkable woman he knew. I watched his face. It was seamless. That was the hardest part, how seamless it was. You could not have pointed to a single moment and said, "There, look, that is false." It was all surface, and the surface was perfect. The guests toasted. Someone cut the cake. He poured champagne and made a point of being solicitous, refilling glasses, pulling out chairs. He was very good at performing decency. I suspected he had been doing it a long time. When the guests began to drift toward the door, he slipped to the back of the shop to take what he said was a work call. My daughter was saying goodbye to her friends by the front window. I walked to the counter, reached behind the ribbon rolls, and retrieved the recorder, slipped it into my cardigan pocket. I excused myself to the restroom, pressed play. Static, the refrigerator hum, the sound of footsteps. Then his voice, low and quick from the back office where he'd evidently made his call 2 hours earlier, before anyone arrived. "It's happening today. She signs this afternoon." A pause. "The old lady has no idea. She thinks it's about taxes." Another pause, and then a sound, almost a laugh but not quite. "Bryn, I told you, 6 weeks. I just need 6 weeks. I filed the paperwork with Greenway on Monday. Once the deed transfers, they can move on the building. By spring, we'll have the settlement and I'm done." I stood in the small restroom with the water running and listened to the whole thing twice. Then I transferred the file to my phone with the cable I'd brought in my purse. I had planned for this, and I walked back out. My attorney, Ms. Voss, had just arrived. She stood near the door with her briefcase, looking politely uncertain about the cake. He was already moving toward her with his hand extended, smiling. "Mrs. Voss," he said warmly, "thank you for coming. We're just about ready." "Actually," I said from across the room. He turned. Everyone still in the shop turned. I had my phone in my hand. I pressed play and I held it up, and I let the room hear his voice fill the space beneath those pressed tin ceilings. "It's happening today. She signs this afternoon. The old lady has no idea. She thinks it's about taxes." My daughter was still standing by the window. I watched her face as she heard it. I watched the color leave it slowly, the way the sun moves behind clouds, not sudden, but irreversible. I filed the paperwork with Greenway on Monday. Once the deed transfers, they can move on the building. He had gone very still. "Bryn, I told you, 6 weeks." That name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. I saw my daughter flinch, the smallest motion, barely visible, and then go absolutely still. He started to speak. He stopped. He looked around the room. His face went through 3 expressions in fast succession, and I could see him calculating, trying to find the version of this he could still manage. "That's not the full conversation," he said. "You're taking it out of." "Out of context?" My sister said it before I could. She was standing near the cake table with her arms crossed, and her voice was very flat. He looked at my daughter. She wasn't looking back. She was looking at the floor just to the left of her own feet, with her hands at her sides. She wasn't crying. That came later. Right now, she was just very, very still. Sweetheart, he started. Don't, her voice was almost inaudible. Ms. Voss stepped quietly toward the door. He tried once more. He reached toward my daughter's arm and she moved, not dramatically, not a flinch or a shove, just a simple step sideways out of his reach, like she was moving around furniture, like he was already something she was navigating past. He left. I didn't watch him go. I was already crossing the room toward her. She didn't want to talk that night. I didn't ask her to. I drove her home, back to my house, not theirs, and made her soup and put a blanket on the couch and turned on the old nature program she used to watch as a teenager when she was sad, the one about tide pools and sea otters and the quiet persistence of small things. She fell asleep before 9. I sat in the chair across the room and watched her sleep and thought about the 36 years my husband and I had put into that building on Millbrook Avenue. The early mornings and the bad winters, and the year the refrigerator went and we ran it on ice and stubbornness until we could afford the repair. I thought about the day my daughter turned 16 and started helping with the holiday rush, and how my husband had said quietly in the car on the way home, "She belongs here, doesn't she?" Like he'd known. Greenway Properties did not get the building. Ms. Voss made 3 calls on Monday morning and had a cease and desist prepared by Tuesday. My son-in-law had no legal standing. The deed was still entirely in my name because I had never signed. He had filed paperwork with a developer on a building he did not own and could not have transferred without my signature. His attorney apparently had not fully thought through that step. Cecily called it spectacularly premature, and I could hear her smiling through the phone. He was gone before the end of the month. No dramatic confrontation. Just the gradual disappearance of his things from the house, a conversation between attorneys, papers filed quietly. The apartment in East Nashville already had his name on the lease. He had been ready to leave for a long time. I thought about that sometimes. How long someone can be ready to leave while still sitting at your table every Sunday, still pouring your daughter's coffee, still thanking you for dinner. The architecture of that kind of deception, how much energy it must take to maintain it. What else you could do with that energy if you chose differently. I didn't dwell. There was no point in dwelling. Spring came early this year. By March, the dogwoods on our street were already showing white, and the first tulip shipment arrived from our grower 2 full weeks ahead of schedule. My daughter was back at the shop full-time by then, working the counter herself, relearning the pleasure of being useful to the ordinary rhythms of other people's lives. Someone needs flowers for a birthday. Someone needs them for a funeral. Someone needs them because it's Tuesday, and the house feels too quiet. And sometimes a bunch of yellow ranunculus on the kitchen table is the simplest true thing you can do for yourself. She didn't talk about him much. When she did, it was short and factual. The divorce was progressing. She was seeing a therapist. She was sleeping better. One afternoon in late March, I found her in the back workroom repotting a flat of herbs, thyme and lemon balm, and a small rosemary we'd been nursing since January. She had her hair pulled back and her sleeves rolled up, and she was moving with the focused, unhurried rhythm of someone who has remembered what their hands are for. I stood in the doorway for a moment without saying anything. She looked up. "I keep thinking about the Greenway letter," she said. "The one he intercepted." "I know." How long had he been planning it? "Long enough," I said, "but not long enough." She pressed her hands into the soil. "I should have seen it." "You were busy loving someone," I said it simply, because that is what I believe. That love is not stupidity. It is just love. It can coexist with a con and not be diminished by it. What she had felt was real, even if he wasn't. She was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do with the shop?" she asked. "Keep running it." "And after?" I looked at her hands in the soil. Her father's hands, the same long fingers, the same unselfconscious way of working without fuss. "After," I said, "I'll give it to someone who won't ask me to." She laughed. It came out a little ragged, more like a breath than a sound, but it was real and I'd take it. Some evenings now, I close up the shop myself. I like the quiet of it. The particular way the light falls through the front windows at closing, warm and low, catching the dust from the dried arrangements on the upper shelves. I sweep the floor and check the cooler temperature and write the next morning's delivery orders in the same spiral notebook I've used for 20 years. One evening last week, I found, tucked behind the backup credit card machine where I'd left it in February, my husband's old tape recorder. I had forgotten to bring it home. I sat on the stool by the counter and held it in both hands for a moment. Then I pressed play, just to hear if his voice was still there somewhere underneath everything that had been recorded over it. It was. Just a fragment, the tail end of a grocery list, his voice low and a little distracted, saying, "And that bread you like, if they have it." I pressed stop. I put the recorder in my pocket, turned off the lights, locked the door behind me. Outside, Millbrook Avenue was quiet. A couple walked past on the other side of the street, a dog. The first fireflies of the season moving slow and purposeful through the hedgerow at the edge of the parking lot. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the warm dark, in front of the building my husband and I had painted ourselves, on a street nobody much cared about, in a city that had been ours for 36 years. Then I walked to my car and drove home, and the shop was still standing when I left it, and it would still be standing in the morning, and that was enough.